Who is the safest fantasy ace? Who is the SP3 or 4 who has the best ceiling? Who's got the best floor? Answers to all that on more with Paul Sporer here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Hello and welcome everybody to the Thursday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast brought to you by Fantrax. I'm Erik Halterman and I am hosting this one from my parents' guest room, stopping in briefly in Philadelphia on the way up to New York City for Tout Wars over the weekend. So if the ambiance is different or if you see any cats climbing through the screen, that's why that's going on. But Paul, thank you very much for joining me in this very busy time of year. You've been thinking about pitchers just a little bit over the last couple of weeks. You're ready for this show?
Pretty much nonstop. So I think I am prepared. I appreciate you having me on. And if you see some dogs wandering through, it'll be a treat because generally when I'm talking, Shar wants to be nowhere near me. It's kind of a running meme on my stream that the second I fire up stream, she usually pieces out. She'll eventually matriculate back in, but she's on the back of the couch and the sun's out right now. And I know it's like a thing that cats lay in the sun, but this dog is obsessed with the sun. So she's just sunbathing right now.
Well, she may not be all that interested in hearing your fantasy baseball pitching takes, but I'm sure our listeners are. So we'll get to those pretty soon. First, we want to talk about some headlines, though. And the top one to discuss here is Bobby Witt, who was hit by a pitch in his forearm. Thankfully, though, x-rays were negative. We nearly had an interesting storyline here where we got to make fun of all those drafters who are super safe in the first round and who really needed to get Bobby Witt because he's the healthy one. Don't draft Shohei Ohtani.
That's right.
I guess we avoided that. Are you moving Witt at all, or I think we're okay here?
Yeah, I don't think so. I haven't had any number one picks yet. If I did, I might still go Ohtani. I know he's had some negative news recently. I'm not really moved by him not pitching or stealing less and maybe being rested more. So honestly, if I get the number one, it is a little bit of a toss-up. I don't think I really want the number one in my mains right now. I don't want that decision. Give me like the 4 and let me get J-Ram, and then I'll be good to go getting started with that.
Yeah, that works. I've been liking the 3, get Aaron Judge, or if somehow Witt or Ohtani were to fall, I'd be happy with that.
Right.
But
I'd be happy with that too.
With you there. I don't think you need the number one this year. But thankfully, we don't need to spend too much time on this Bobby Witt injury because he looks okay. Mm-hmm. There is a situation brewing in the Rangers rotation that I wanted to get your thoughts on. We've got Kumar Rocker and Jack Leiter as 2 interesting young pitchers who people want to take a chance on, but they looked like they were maybe going to be blocked at the start of the year. But just now we've got a sore elbow for Cody Bradford, who's going to start the season on the 15-day IL. We also had Tyler Mahle get an MRI on his forearm, although that one seems to be not a problem. That returned negative. So is it time to take a chance on Rocker and maybe Leiter as well? How would you be interpreting this situation?
You know, right now it looks like Leiter's got the inside track and they're really trying to get him in the mix. And honestly, you never really know. And obviously, I work over at FanGraphs, so roster resources there. And Jason Martinez does amazing work with keeping that updated. But on a lot of things, he's given his best guess. He's reading the tea leaves and coming up with the best guess that he can for things. He's got Leiter in there right now, and I think it makes some sense. He's been much more dominant in spring and having some success there. Still has a 15% walk rate. But for Rocker's part, he's also got an elevated walk rate, and he's not missing bats. Now, he has 2 innings. That's quite literally nothing. I barely shouldn't even bring it up. But I do think that Leiter might have that inside track because I don't think that's just based on spring numbers. I think that's reading some of the tea leaves from the Rangers brass as well, where they want Leiter to get a shot here and kind of see where it goes. And yeah, with Mahle coming back clean, it does have to be one or the other there. Really bummed about Bradford. I'm not fully out. Elbow soreness. Obviously, that can develop into something negative. That could be a problem. But I think even in an NFBC landscape where you don't have any ILs and so you're kind of eating up a reserve spot, I might take a late shot because I could see him plummeting in drafts. He hasn't been going super high in mains. He's gone pick 328, has Cody Bradford. That could fall into the 370s or later. And at that point, I think I would take the shot and hold for a couple weeks and just kind of see where it's at with him. Because I'm really impressed with Cody Bradford. I was really gearing up for him to kind of win that job and pick up where last year left off. But turning it over to the young kids, Leiter, He's got some great swing and miss, as does Rocker, but neither of them have really been able to fully harness their stuff. We saw Rocker show some control, but I think from his sample last year, you guys were able to see the great difference between command and control. They're used interchangeably sometimes, but they are different. Control is simply hitting the zone. Can you throw strikes? Command is putting the ball where you want it. And, coming up through the minors, Kumar Rocker's had low walk rates, a lot of control. Can he command his pitches consistently, though? Can he get anything off that fastball so he doesn't have to live with the slider? I think he's got a less refined arsenal than Leiter, and that's why I do favor Leiter here between these two.
All right, so some reasons to stay in on multiple members of the Rangers rotation, but specifically Jack Leiter. Let's move on to the next bit of news, which involves your Tigers. Parker Meadows, who's been dealing with a nerve issue throughout spring, says he's optimistic about being ready for opening day. Are you optimistic about Parker Meadows making opening day? And if not, who else should we be looking at in Detroit?
I'm hoping, because I really like Parker Meadows, and obviously he can be a catalyst atop that lineup. It is good news. A lot of times we get this news, it's all doom and gloom, which is the right reaction. You should be super negative about things and always tack on like an extra week or 3 to injuries, because these timelines are always favorable. But then as guys kind of get through it and the rehab starts going, a lot of times there are times where they're able to beat the expected return time. So I'm pretty excited here that Parker Meadows has some optimism. I think the Tigers will be interested in bringing him north if he is ready, but if not, it'll be Wenzel Perez, who, deep leagues, there might be a little something, probably still AL only. I'm not sure that I would take him in the main. I want to see if he's gone in any of these forms. Actually, he's gone in one of them. Pick 447 for Wenzel Perez in one of these mains. Meanwhile, Meadows has gone in all 4, of course, still at pick 255, because people would be happy to wait the two weeks, even if he has to start the season on the IL. So yeah, I'm still drafting Meadows. And maybe you go Wenzel with like your last pick if you take Meadows and you just want to be covered there.
For people who aren't as familiar with Parker Meadows, since we haven't actually seen him fully unleashed over a full season, I would say, what is the ultimate appeal here? What's the upside? What sort of player is Parker Meadows if we get him over 600 plate appearances this season?
It's kind of a do a bit of everything type guy. Like he has some burgeoning power that can get there. He's got some speed, and if they let him run and he's smart about his decisions, the very analytics forward team there with Scott Harris and AJ Hinch at the helm, they're not going to let him run a terrible rate and run into outs, especially because the Tigers offense, while better, is still going to be the weakness of the team. Pitching is going to carry this ball club as far as they're going to go, and so you cannot be giving up outs. So if he's running a 9 for 13 the way he did last year, Parker Meadows will be slowed down. But at his best, I think he can be a mid-teens double-double type of guy. 15 and 15 type with a decent batting average. I think he's better than the 244 we saw as he develops. I think he can be kind of a 250s, 260s sort of guy. And those guys don't always jump off the page because they don't have a single carrying tool in fantasy. But if you add up all the components, especially as a leadoff hitter on a competent team, I'm not going to say the Tigers offense is great, but on a competent ball club, then that usually translates into a pretty strong player, especially for the deep league formats that a lot of us play. Now, if you're playing in a 10 and 12, that player type is a little bit more interchangeable, and you don't have to bend over backwards to get them. But in your 15 teamers like the main event, those glue guys, when you get 600 plate appearances from them, they can be so valuable. And I do believe that Parker Meadows at his best still has 2020 potential too.
All right, so Parker Meadows, a potentially useful option for the back half of your roster. Keep an eye on that injury news. If it keeps trending positive, go get him. Another injury to track here. We've got Jeff McNeil of the Mets is going to miss opening day. He's going to be out about 3 to 4 weeks. I assume if that's 3 to 4 weeks from today, then they're not committing to him missing much of April. But Jeff McNeil with a tweaked oblique. I'm not sure exactly what a tweak is. A low-grade right oblique strain is, I guess, the more official term here. Going to miss some time, which opens up playing time at second base for the Mets. Is it going to be Luis Angel Acuna? That would be the expectation, but we've also got reports here that it might actually be Brett Beatty starting at second base. He's had a good spring. You taking a shot on either Acuna or Beatty with this news?
I think you could find me taking Brett Beatty. Now, I've got some bias toward him that I'll freely cop to. He's a local product here in Central Texas. I'm in the Austin area. He went to high school there, so I've been knowing about Brett Beatty. I'm not usually keyed in on high schoolers, and barely keyed in on college, even though I live near Texas and I went to the University of Texas. I watch a handful of games. I kind of keep up on them, but I'm not like super dialed in. So this was one I was in early on with Brett Beatty. This kid was, generating a lot of buzz in the Central Texas area. So I've been following him ever since. I'm big time rooting for him. I would love to see him get the opportunity. I could take the shot. I think it is kind of a team needs sort of thing if you want to take this gamble. If you need a little bit more power type of bat late, again, we're talking like one of your last picks right now. I don't think these guys, either Acuna nor Beatty, is going to be super expensive. We're talking past pick 400. If you need some power, I think you go Beatty. If you need some pure speed and you don't really care what comes with it, then it's definitely Acuna at that point.
I think that makes a lot of sense. For Beatty, he's shown almost nothing at the big league level, a 607 OPS, and none of the underlying numbers are good, but he's only 25 and he was supposed to be pretty good. I think this is a case where you give a guy probably one more season. If he's given, a month or two at the start of this year and he's bad again, I don't think I'm ever drafting Brett Beatty again, but I think even though we've seen him for parts of 3 years, his youth means it's still worth one more chance. Let's move on to the main topic of the day, which is going to be Paul's favorite pitchers. What we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at this Google sheet, which has got the NFBC ADP from the 4 main event drafts, which have taken place so far. And I've broken it up by tiers. I've got SP1s, SP2s, all the way down to, I think, SP8 or so. We're going to go over the first few tiers here, well, really as many as we get to, and talk about some of Paul's favorite pitchers and Paul's least favorite pitchers, starting with the fantasy aces. Now, Paul, if I could give you any fantasy ace, anybody in the top 15 at his current price, who are you taking?
At their current price, I'm likely to pass on the two big, the SK brothers, if you will, Skeens and Skubal. I really like them. And, I've got some Crochet shares, but he's zipping up the board as I expected, which is why I purposefully secured them in the fall and winter, knowing that there was a chance that he could be that one of those key drivers once main event season started, and we're definitely seeing it. So I think all three of those are a bit of a pass, but I do want an ace. I do like to start off with a couple big hitters, an ace closer, and an ace starter. So I do start to look in that Logan Gilbert, Cole Reagans. I'm a big Fromber guy, and I see he's kind of getting moved up. Like the community likes, or the market likes him more than I think sometimes like the fantasy industry does. I think he gets pushed down a little bit. Sometimes it's like boring in the fantasy industry. I love the guys that are workhorses that just pile up the innings. The interesting thing there, though, is I don't really understand why Logan Webb is so much cheaper than Fromber. So I'd be more inclined to maybe pass him and go for Webb. We'll talk about that with the SP2s. So I like Reagans, Snell. I think Burns is kind of interesting. He's starting to get some negativity his way too, and I get it. Your colleague and my friend Jeff Erickson, on their Sunday pod when they were talking their fades, he made it very simple, and it's a very compelling case. He simply read the strikeout rates in order for Corbin Burns the last several years: 37, 36, 31, 26, 23. What's the next number in that sequence? It is alarming. I do understand that. However, my only counter there is I don't necessarily believe the Ks are gone, because while the swinging strike rate has moved down in concert, it hasn't completely evaporated. We're still talking about a guy with a 13% swinging strike rate. And generally the shorthand is between 2 to 2.25 times the swinging strike rate can be an expected strikeout rate. So I think he fell short of that last year with a 23 when he could have been more in the 26, 27 range. And so I do believe he can get back into the upper 20s with Arizona. I'm not fully out on Burns. I wish there was a bigger discount. I will definitely say that. But if I am looking for that ace, I'm not necessarily afraid to run him. And I've been on the DeGrom train, similar to Garrett Crochet. When you're just talking about the best pitchers, I understand the baggage that comes with him. But one of my main points the last couple of years in terms of pitcher analysis is this notion that we have to stop pretending there's a big gap between safe and unsafe. It's like this, Erik. And for those that are just listening, I'm making a very small gap between my hands because I just don't believe that there's this big gap between, Jacob deGrom and Fromber. And I just got done saying I like Fromber. He is an innings workhorse. But you cannot promise me that he's going to get 180 innings so much more than you can promise me that Jacob deGrom stays healthy and spikes a $150 or a $160. So give me the guy that's just much more talented. And I'm not shading Fromber here. He's 2 rounds cheaper. I just wanted to use somebody who's a workhorse who people lean on for innings. And that's why I'm not afraid of the deGroms, the Snells, the Crochets. Give me the talent. I'll let the chips fall where they may with health. And I understand that some guys are riskier. I'm not dumb. I do acknowledge that. What I'm saying is that extra risk is very small comparatively, because if you are pitching, if you are a pitcher, you are at extreme risk for injury, and that's it. The starting point is extreme. So yes, deGrom is higher up on that level, but if we're already starting at extreme, why wouldn't I just take the best guys?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the best way to think about it is, like you said, the gap between them is smaller. The extreme injury risks probably are as big injury risks as you think, but the guys who seem healthy,
Yes.
well, it's really just that they've been healthy so far. They're at least a moderately high injury risk.
That's exactly
I want
it.
to ask you about 2 guys in here, one of whom I accidentally deleted. So if you've been watching us on YouTube, you will have noticed me editing this spreadsheet in real time. Dylan Cease went in a run of relievers, and I accidentally deleted him from the pitcher ADP along with the rest of them.
Been there.
Dylan Cease
I've
as
done
the
that.
11th. Yep, I really wish NFBC would give us a separate.
I know.
SP
I've been
and
asking.
RP ADP.
I've been asking him to do that. I get it that everyone's listed as pitcher, but can you not finagle something for the ADP page for us?
Hopefully we get some more movement there. So I'm wondering about Reagans and Cease, though. Cole Reagans, Dylan Cease going as the 10th and 11th pitchers. There are some guys who I view as a little bit safer than the guys going in front of them. Chris Sale, Jacob deGrom, Blake Snell. And Reagans and Cease can still give you the elite strikeout rates you want from a fantasy ace.
No doubt.
Do you think that they are pretty good options? I mean, there are guys I've been falling to here. If I miss the very elite SP1s, I think these guys are pretty close to giving me a shot at that. And they have a high floor. Would you consider them among the safest SP1s?
I'm 50-50 with you. I do agree on Reagans. I'm very much in on him. If I don't get one of those tippy top guys that I named and I have to wait a little bit, I'll go with Reagans. Cease, I'm a little bit sketchier on, because I think we've seen him run the gamut of his range of outcomes the last 3 years. 2022 was the high level, the 2.20 ERA, 111 WHIP. 2023 was the low level, the 4.58 and the 1.42 WHIP. And then last year was kind of not necessarily in between, but still on the higher end, but more down from where it was in 2022 with a 347 and 107. I do like that he improved his whip, and he did that by allowing fewer walks and fewer hits than he did in 2023 for Dylan Cease. He's a strikeout god, but I don't think that volatility is gone. And so he's usually a guy I like to buy the dip on. I do still think a 4 ERA is in his range of outcomes. And I don't just mean like he has a 5% chance of doing it. I think it's still in like the 20-25% chance for Dylan Cease. I do like that he's in San Diego. I do think he's a pretty trustworthy pitcher, because even in his bad years, you're going to pile up Ks and generally pile up innings. So I don't mind you being in on him, but I don't have as much safety for Dylan Cease. Even if you're guaranteeing innings, right? If we just say, give everyone 180 and then rank them, I still am a little bit lower on him. I've got Dylan Cease ranked 20th, which maybe I'm a little light too, because if he's in the market at 11, I don't know if I'm that far below, but 2023 is ringing in my head, and maybe I need to get over it, because it is 2 out of 3 that are great seasons and then the 1 dud. But it does strike me that if he loses command of that slider, doesn't he just fall back into like a low 4s ERA with like a modest whip, a boatload of Ks, and decent win opportunity, which wouldn't kill you. I don't necessarily think Cease is a huge risk to go 458, 142 again, but I do think like a 410, 120 is on the table for Cease.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Performance risk is certainly still a type of risk, even though we mostly worry about injury risk with our pitchers. Is there any other safe options for the cowards out there who really want to just make sure they don't mess up their fantasy ace? Who would you recommend to those people who are all in on safety early in drafts?
I mean, if you're talking about that first column there, it's got to be the top 2 guys, Skeens and Skubal. Wheeler and Gilbert have to be actually chief among them, probably those 2, because they have longer track records than either Skeens or Skubal. That's the really interesting thing, is that the 2 tip-top guys don't have track record going for them. So Wheeler is the overall number 1 there. if you're just saying, I need safety, I need somebody who's done it multiple years, it's definitely Wheels. I think Gilbert's up there. And then I would come back to Burns again, because yes, while the strikeout rate is dipping, he is still packing on inning after inning of quality work, and you can make up the Ks elsewhere. So yeah, I think you're probably looking at one of Wheeler, Gilbert, or Burns if you really want that safe workhorse who's done it a bunch and has shown that he can do the innings year in, year out.
All right, fair enough. Let's move on to the SP2s here. And if you are someone who is avoiding the entire top tier of pitchers this year, which is certainly an approach I've seen out there with the increasing number of pitcher injuries, why not just, grab 5 hitters before we start looking at pitchers? If you are to do that and you still want somebody going in the SP2 tier who has the chance of giving you ace numbers, is there anybody on this list who stands out to you as this guy actually really could be not just an ace, but he's got a real chance at finishing as one of the top starters on the board?
Absolutely. I think a lot of this list can fulfill that. Spencer Schwellenbach is the helium guy of the year. My podcast co-host Justin Mason actually has him ranked 8th. So he looks at this 17 and scoffs at it and says, no, top 10 for me. And I get it. There's a lot to like with him, but the certainty is definitely not there. He's a sophomore coming off of a great rookie year. But, I look at guys like Tyler Glasnow and I go back to my main point about on a per inning basis, where does he rank? If you could turn off injuries and give everybody $180, where would Tyler Glasnow rank? I don't think outside of the top 5. And if you look last year, and I think that Nick Pollock was the one who put me on this, so I want to give credit where it is when I'm using somebody else's point, but I've latched onto it and I totally agree with it. And I think Blake Snell could have the same thing happen. When Glasnow was healthy last year, they treated him like an ace. 6-7 innings a pop consistently, including an 8-inning shut piece against the Mets as well. Obviously, he did get hurt again, and he did have a handful of fivers in there. But on a per inning basis, he's wonderful, and they trust him. I'll take my chances. He's added innings each of the last 2 years. If he gets to $150 this year, let's say he added 14 innings from 23 to 24. If he gets 16 innings more this year, that'd be up to 150. To me, that's enough. With what he's able to do on a per inning basis, Tyler Glasnow, 150 innings is enough for a top 10 type season. So I still really like him. I'm a big Tanner Bybee fan. I did an article this morning looking at some of the biggest risers during this early main event, the first 3. The 4th one wasn't done yet when I pulled the numbers, and I didn't want to redo the whole chart this morning for the 4th one. Tanner Bybee's up a round plus, 18 picks compared to the RotoWire Online Championship. I don't know if that's just noise, where there was 3 people in those drafts that really like him, but I'm kind of annoyed by it because I really like him, and I liked the price that he was at. So hands off my Tanner Bybee, please, because I really like him. I think he's very consistent. 2 years in now, I trust Cleveland kind of implicitly with pitchers, especially quality ones. The changes that he made from being drafted into the majors have been really impressive. I'm a big Bybee guy. Really big on the Minnesota guys too. They each, Pablo Lopez, Bailey Ober, and is Pablo on this, or does he fall lower? Oh no, he's on the first column there. Wow. I don't think he should be above the other 2. So honestly, I wouldn't take Pablo because I would just take Joe Ryan or Bailey Ober because they're all 3 the same guy. The famous Spider-Man meme of the 2 Spider-Mans pointing at each other. Just add a 3rd in there and it's these 3 guys because they're all the same. Great Ks, no walks, and a home run issue. And that home run issue comes from the fact that they live in the zone. So it's kind of a workplace hazard of not walking anybody. When you pepper the zone like that, you're going to give up some homers. But I think Ober and Ryan are very stable. I will take my chances on their home run rate, maybe spiking a little bit lower, like a 1-1 or better. 1-1 is actually still kind of high, but because they don't walk anybody, their ERAs are still going to be pretty low. So I like both of them. If you just want to go boring, steady Eddie, Aaron Nola is still pretty bankable. And I know maybe steady Eddie is the wrong phrase because his ERA hasn't been steady, but a lot of times that's happening to him because of the bad defense around him, as opposed to anything that he's necessarily doing. So I still think Aaron Nola is pretty bankable. And I know I'm naming a lot of guys here, but this is a really rich list that I think has some intriguing players. I'm in on the Hunter Brown hype, but I'm not in on the Hunter Green hype. I don't think he tangibly did anything last year to earn the career year that he had. He does have electric stuff, but he's in that ballpark. He's been a home run machine each of his first 3 years before last year. And last year, the only thing that really changed was his homer to fly ball rate went in half. And I don't know that he did anything to earn that. And he's still in Cincy. So I think he's the landmine here. I'm not really in on Strider in the main event because I don't want to wait a month. And we just don't know. Like, what if they take longer with him? What if they race out to like a 20-5 record? You know, like Tampa Bay did a couple years ago, and they say, we can really slow play this so that he's here for the second half in the playoffs and we don't have to rush him. I don't know if that's going to happen. He could be back even sooner because he has been progressing pretty well, but I don't want to risk it. And then I think the Freddie Peralta and Luis Castillo, I think they're a little misplaced in this tier too. There are reasons for them to have some appeal, but I think some of these guys higher in this list just really outclass them. And I've been a Luis Castillo guy for years, but Freddie Peralta, I don't know. I think inertia is keeping him up here. I don't really vibe with that one as much. 29 is not crazy. I will say that. I have Freddie Peralta. Watch me have him higher. No, I have him 36. So, you know, I'm just a bit lower. And so I just don't think he's quite in this SP2 column here. So, but if I'm picking on two guys, it's Tyler Glasnow and Tanner Bybee, just to put a bow on it after speaking about 50 guys.
All right. So we've gone over your favorites and your fades from the first two tiers here.
Oh, and I'm sorry, and Webb.
You got one more.
Well, just because I mentioned him when we talked about Fromber, I see those two together. Righty-lefty versions of each other. I know Webb was a bit worse last year, but again, I don't really understand why Webb is 30 picks cheaper than Fromber. And as much as I love Fromber, I'm just going to wait 2 rounds and get Logan Webb. So I just want to tack that on there, even though I did mention him a little bit earlier.
All right, good call. So a whole bunch of favorites and fades from the SP1 and SP2 tier. Let's move on to the SP3s and 4s, some of the guys you're going to round out your staff with, but who you still have pretty high expectations for. I mean, just checking the ADP range here. The early guys going around pick 110, the late guys just outside pick 200. So certainly by the end of this group, you can afford to be taking some chances. We're going to talk about both some ceilings and some floors here. Let's start with the ceilings. Who are some guys in these SP3 and 4 tier who you'd be drafting for their upside? Who are some guys who you think really have a legitimate shot of being SP2s or even fantasy aces in this range of the draft?
If they can thwart the park, I really like the Tampa Bay guys. I do have to admit that the fact that they're going to be playing in a minor league park that is a replica of Yankee Stadium has given me some pause with them, but I like the whole group. We heard from the Tampa Bay GM during the winter meetings that they're looking for about 150 innings from Shane McClanahan this year. That's really encouraging. I love Shane Mack. Taj Bradley's somebody I've been a big fan of throughout his prospect hype into last year when he pitched well. Ryan Pepio, loved him after the Glasnow trade. Couldn't get enough of him last year. Feel like he's ready to do even more. I'm not as big on Boz, but he's also cheaper. And Rasmussen, same sort of deal. But again, that park gives me just a little bit of pause. So depending on where you come out with the park, I think the Tampa Bay guys are intriguing. I'm probably just going to pass on Shane McClanahan. I can't say Shane since they have 2 Shanes. Pass on McClanahan and go to the other guys in the second column, but I do like them as a collective. I think Justin Steele's being a bit underrated. I think he's the best lefty in that rotation, not Shota Imanaga. Maybe I'm an Imanaga hater, and I'm sorry, folks, but like I feel like he did exactly what we thought he was going to do for the bulk of last year, which is give up a lot of home runs. Now, he was amazing to start, absolutely unbelievable, but I can't get over the 1-4 homer 9, and if he doesn't start off with the electric run that he had at the beginning of the year to pad his numbers, are we going to get another like low 3s ERA? I know it was sub 3 last year, but you don't really project anybody for that. So is it going to be low 3s? I'm looking at that 372 FIP for Imanaga, and I'm concerned. Meanwhile, Steele comes quite a bit cheaper. And yes, he did have injury last year, but one was a hamstring. That just kind of happens to you. I don't think that that's his fault. And then I forget what the other one was. It was a small injury later in the year. But all in all, I was really impressed with how good Steele was when he was upright and pitching. This is another big mover that's really teeing me off because I've been a huge fan of his. Christopher Sanchez is having just a bonkers spring, and that is driving up the price, and I totally get it. I am still going to pay the toll, though. I like him that much. I'm not somebody who totally backs off a guy that I liked just because the price moved up. And I know some people that are, right? They stick to their projections, and if the price gets too high, they move off of it. Totally get that. They're drafting the projection, not the player. I'm more of a draft the player guy though, and I'm big on Christopher Sanchez. He cashed in for me last year, and I'm going to go back to that well this year. If the price gets too much higher, I might tap the brakes, like if he's inside the top 100. But right now, pick 124, I can pay it. I'm a convert to Robbie Ray. I was not so keen on him early in draft season, but a lot of smart friends of mine in the industry have been constantly talking him up. I am moved by Tarek Skubal teaching him his changeup to give him something to combat righties even more. We've seen him be great before, a Cy Young guy with big strikeout totals throughout his career, and in the park to fix his biggest issue, or at least improve it, which is, of course, home runs. That's always been a thing for Robbie Ray. San Francisco's a good park to maybe hide that, so I definitely like him. I'm buying the Kirby dip. I think that the shoulder inflammation, he wanted to pitch through it. I don't find this to be a major issue. I will take the 15-day IL stint early on and ride with it for George Kirby. I just like him too much, and I think the discount is almost too much right now. I've seen him go in the 10th round of the first two main events. I don't know where he's gone in these last two, but I see a 145 ADP. I'm all aboard that. And I'm also a convert recently to Nick Pivetta. Similar to Robbie Ray, the thing that bothers me about it, my own thing that bothers me about it is I always tell people not to obscure the guys who have maybe a little bit of a weaker ERA, but a great whip and strikeout rate. Because I think when we see an ERA that starts with 4, we're instantly put off. We're like, that guy sucks. And like, no, he doesn't. And especially in the 15-team environment which we play, which was what we're talking about here with the main event, a 4.10 ERA or something in the low 4s, if you have a good enough whip and enough strikeouts and some wins, you can overcome that. And Nick Pivetta has a 30% K rate the last 2 years with a really strong whip. And I was missing the boat a little bit on him. So I moved him up my rankings quite a bit yesterday in the most recent update. He's going to San Diego, which again, similar to Ray, can help quell his biggest issue, which is home runs. So I'm a very late convert to Nick Pivetta, but I would pay that 150 price tag. And that's how I feel about that first column. Oh, Jared Jones as well. Remember when, early April last year, April and May, he was the talk of the town, not Paul Skeens. And I don't say that to diss Paul Skeens at all. He deserves to be the talk of the town. But Jared Jones was right there looking like a amazing number 2 at the very least. And I think he can do that again. I know he dealt with some injuries, but I don't need to reiterate the point I've said a few times already about the injury risk. I'm going to take the talent. And Jared Jones has gobs of talent.
Well, I think we mentioned just about half of the SP3s here as having big upside, but I don't think you're wrong. I think this is a great tier. I think if you set things up so that you only have one pitcher from the first page and you target 2 of these guys, I think that's not a bad place to be. One pitcher you didn't mention, who I want to get your thoughts on, Jack Flaherty, back with your Tigers, and he was a top 5 pitcher in baseball, I would say, before he was dealt to the Dodgers. You look at all the underlying numbers, he was practically as good as Garrett Crochet. And while Garrett Crochet was babied down the stretch, still had good numbers, but over short innings, Jack Flaherty got worse down the stretch with the Dodgers, but was still pretty good. And you can now get him as a cheap SP3, the 41st starting pitcher off the board. I know there are injury concerns here, but certainly when we're talking about ceilings, I mean, does Jack Flaherty have the ceiling of a fantasy ace? He looked like one for 4 months of last year.
Absolutely. And obviously I'm a Tigers fan for anybody that doesn't know. And so, there is some homerism there, but I don't think I'm being a homer to say that their development has really taken a major step forward these last few years where they've developed guys and turned them into premium talents. And that's not necessarily just everyone turning into an ace. That's bringing like a 6th starter into a 4 starter, a 3 starter into a 1, at least for the time that we had Flaherty. He was definitely that. Now, maybe he fades more into like a 2.5 type starter. That's still very good at SP41. That actually matches my ranking of him. So I have no problem taking him there. I think he's being a little bit unfairly judged for what he did in the second half. We always do that though, right? In the fantasy community, we're always overly focused on the second half versus the first half. To a degree, I get it. It's the last thing we saw, but I always think we're too much prisoners of the moment in fantasy baseball in general. Like we don't even focus on the 2 years ago and 3 years ago. Obviously, you don't want to go too far back. I'm not going to start touting, what Justin Verlander did with the Tigers as a reason to draft him. Right. But the last 2 or 3 years, I think the whole sample matters. And I don't think it just has to be like, what have you done for me lately? Now, Saying that, somebody would say, well, Jack Flaherty wasn't good the last 2 or 3 years. So I'm not saying that's a great example for him specifically, but I am saying that his first half is getting erased a bit because he faded with the Dodgers. It's not like he was worthlessly terrible, though. So yes, I am back in on him. He's back in a spot where he thrived. He's comfortable. And if he stays healthy, I absolutely think he can get back on track with the Tigers. Maybe not repeat exactly what he did, which was a 2.95 ERA and 0.96 WHIP. But listen, again, he faltered a bit with the Dodgers, but it was 358, 128. The WHIP was really the problem, but the 358 ERA is fine. Honestly, I would even take that at SP41. I do need a better WHIP than 128, but if you add it all together, it was a 107 last year. I think it can be around like a 115, and I will take that with a 330, 340 ERA at SP41 for Jack Flaherty.
All right, we are going to continue our tour through the middle rounds, looking at some high floor starting pitchers right after this message from our sponsors. First, Fantrax, which is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Coming from another service, Fantrax makes it easy. Fantrax can import any of your current leagues and customize if needed. Fantrax offers the most in-depth player pool in the industry, including minor league players. Do you need a customizable commissioner service for your fantasy league? Fantrax offers more customization than any other platform. Waivers, categories, scoring system, schedule. Fantrax offers custom solutions for all that and more. And it's all free. Sign up for free today and be entered to win an official MLB signed jersey from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Simply go to fantrax.com/rotowire and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/rotowire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. And we're also brought to you by the NFBC RotoWire Online Championship, which is live. Play fantasy baseball against your favorite RotoWire experts on NFBC this baseball season. Jeff Erickson, James Anderson, Clay Link, and more. Paul, I don't know if you knew my new nickname, and more, will be competing in the RotoWire NFBC Online Championship for a shot at $150,000. Sign up for a draft today at rotowire.com/high stakes. That's rotowire.com/high stakes. And welcome back to the Thursday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Erik Halterman here with Paul Sporer, going over Paul's favorite pitchers at each point in the draft. We're taking a look at main event ADP here. We've gotten up to the SP3s and SP4s, talked about some high ceiling options, which was seemingly half of the SP3s, if not more. Let's talk about some high floors. Sometimes you just need a little bit more certainty, even though we're heading into, the late 100s, you still need some floor on that pitching staff, particularly if you've taken a chance early on, say, a Tyler Glasnow, and you want to just make sure you've got pitchers throughout the whole year. So who are some pitchers in this region of the draft that you target specifically for their high floor?
I think you immediately look at somebody like Sonny Gray there as SP37, just kind of punching the clock, getting it done there in St. Louis. Might get traded in season, but it would likely only improve his win capability. If things don't go well in St. Louis and they want to move him because they start tearing things down a little bit, he'd almost certainly go to a contender. So maybe you get a little bit of a worse park, but for a higher win floor for somebody like Sonny Gray, I really, really like him. I know it's a little tough to say this about somebody returning from Tommy John, so we'll call it half on the floor here, but I do think once Sandy Alcantara gets up and running, and I know that there's also been questions about, does he have a limit? Does he not have a limit? Are they going to manage him early? Because then when they trade him, that team can kind of, take the reins off a little bit. I do think he's going to be a consistently solid, strong 6-inning type of guy when he's pitching. Maybe not the 7-8 that we see when he's at his best, but I'm excited about the return of Sandy Alcantara. So I do think that there is some floor there, even though he is somebody returning from Tommy John. And then Zach Gallen. I think it was very much classic World Series hangover last year. Those extra innings seemed to get to him and carried over into some fatigue last year where he just was a bit off. But also, let's not pretend that he sucked. 365, 126 in 148 innings, dealt with a little bit of injury, only 28 starts, but he was still solid. 16% strikeout minus walk isn't terrible. I think he gets his control back in order. He had a 9% walk rate last year after 6 and 7% rates the 2 years before that. His strikeout rate was still in line with what he normally does, 26, 27. He was down to 25, so down a little. Everything was just a little bit worse last year. I like Zach Gallen to get back on track and deliver some floor. And then are we in the second column yet? Should I be doing SP4 stuff right now too? Okay. So then as far as some of the floor guys, again, this is a when he's pitching thing because he gets hurt every year. But you know that when Nathan Eovaldi's pitching, he's going to be pretty solid. Right? He kind of gives you like a mid-3s ERA, a good whip, good win opportunity on Texas. I think both 2023 World Series participants suffered World Series hangover last year. And I think both are going to be really good this year. Of course, Seth Lugo is classic floor. He's not going to do what he did last year. The defense really helped him out. Everything went perfectly for him. But even with his fade, I will say this, the market has done a great job at not overrating these guys in recent years. A decade ago, he's SP15 guaranteed based on what he did last year. Like going back to what I was saying about being prisoners of the moment. So, big applause to the fantasy market for properly valuing Seth Lugo where he should be as a really solid floor guy at age 35, coming off a career year. We tip our cap for the career year, but we're going to put him back in the 350s with his ERA and like a low 120s or maybe 1 teens for his whip. But hey, I'll take that all day. Win opportunity should be solid with KC. And that's kind of it for the floor, because a lot of these guys still have a lot of risk. Oh, Zach Eflin. I'd be remiss not to mention Zach Eflin.
True.
I think he's developing into a bit of a workhorse himself. I actually put him in to my modern day workhorse column, acknowledging that he's a little bit behind like the Frombers and the Logan Webbs of it, but we do go to him for innings. And I like him in Baltimore. I think he's being a little bit forgotten there. He's put up another $165, 178 the year before that. And again, those aren't crazy numbers, but in today's game, if you can get like a guaranteed 165 plus, you feel pretty good about that, even with like a low to mid 3s ERA and a good whip. So Zach Eflin definitely in that mix too.
All right, one more pitcher on this page that I want to get your thoughts on before we talk about some of the guys you're fading, and maybe it is this guy. Yusei Kikuchi. I'm not really sure. Is he a high ceiling guy? I think he might be. I think the floor could be reasonable too, the way his numbers really improved last year. Are you in on Yusei Kikuchi?
I'm really torn on him because, we saw this with like Tyler Anderson, and he's better than Tyler Anderson. He's got way better stuff than Tyler Anderson. But he went to the Angels after a career year, and we were like, well, he's not going to forget what he did. He'll be fine. And he totally cratered. But he did rebound last year, by the way. So, hats off to Tyler Anderson on that. It wasn't that fundamentally different for Yusei Kikuchi in Houston that he can't remember what he did to find success there, which was, I think, just throw more sliders. I think it was that simple, and he found a lot of success. And he's always been somebody who has core skills that are strong. Like he misses bats. The last couple years, he hasn't walked too many guys. I haven't really been diving in, I think because of the stink of the Angels, which is unfair, especially coming from me. It's pretty rich. If you listen to my podcast, I'm usually gassing up Angels pitchers to kind of a crazy degree. I'm a big Jose Soriano guy, Patrick Sandoval when he was out there, Reed Detmers, I can't quit, Chase Silseth. There's another one I'm forgetting. Oh, Griffin Canning. So for me to be saying that is a little bit rich, but I do worry a little bit about Kikuchi. I think I've been burned by him before, and I usually don't hold that against guys. I try to judge them, individually each year, but I'm a little bit out on him. I will say it's a fair price. So I'm fence sitting a little bit, but I lean toward no thanks for me with Kikuchi. I'll tell you that I have him ranked 62. So I'm a bit off the market there at SP47. And can I throw in one other guy just before we go to the others? Because I was really focused on the SP3s and not the 4s. I love Gavin Williams. I'm buying the surge. I'm part of the surge. I'm part of the people pushing him up. Goes back to my love of Cleveland pitchers, the fact that he's got quality stuff that he couldn't quite harness last year. I love what he's doing in spring as well. So he's a high ceiling guy, Gavin Williams, that I forgot to mention there because I was focused too much on the left side column.
All right, we're going to move to the 5s and 6s in a minute, but real quick, is there anybody on this page that you're just completely out on? I mean, we've got a handful of guys coming back from injury, say Shane McClanahan. We've got some guys who dealt with injuries last year, Brian Wu, Kodai Senga, a little bit worrisome there.
Yeah,
are you worried about those guys or worried about any other guys for performance? Yeah, you don't like Senga.
I really just haven't been paying Senga's price. So he's definitely somebody I've just continued to avoid. I haven't really gotten there with Luzardo. I am intrigued by him going to Philly. Even though it's a worse park, it's a much better team, right? And so you kind of balance those two things of like leaving Miami's park, but going to a team that's a lot more competent just in general, and at least has just better support. They got a great bullpen. They got a good lineup. Their defense doesn't necessarily support their guys, but I have been ignoring Luzardo, and maybe that's to my detriment, but I haven't been getting there. Shane Baz, as I mentioned, while I do love the Tampa Bay group generally as a whole, I'm a little bit out on Baz, and I'm not with the Brandon Pfaadt love, and I'm very sorry because a lot of my friends who I consider very smart about pitching love him, but I can't get there. And the one question that they can't quite answer either is, how is he going to stop lefties? How is he going to mitigate the homers to lefties specifically, or the homers to anybody, because he gives them up to righties too. But lefties eat him for lunch, and I haven't seen anything where Brandon Pfaadt has really developed there. So unless he finds something to do that, I think he's still going to be one of these frustrating guys that can have 4 or 5 good starts in a row, but then give most of it back with a 3-homer dud in that 6th start. And that's the tough part for me, is because he'll erase a lot of the goodness. And because he's a home run guy, it could come against any team. It's not necessarily just use him against crappy teams and start him against good teams. When Brandon Pfaadt is on, and if it's a lefty light lineup, he can beat the best team in baseball. But when he's off, the Marlins can run him up. If they throw 5 lefties in there, well, maybe not the Marlins. They have the literal worst offense in baseball. But if, some middling team, if they run 5 lefties in there and he's off a little bit, then Brandon Pfaadt can get run up by them. So I've been avoiding him. And this one really pains me because this guy was instrumental in my success last year. I've been a long time Reynaldo Lopez fan. And to be honest, I didn't land on him as like some stroke of genius last year. I'll freely admit it, that I was just going with a guy I love. And I picked him super late, and I picked him up waivers in one league and last rounds in a couple others. I had him in 3 different leagues and enjoyed the greatness from him. He looks terrible in spring, and it has me a little bit worried. I don't want to overreact to 7 innings, but they're really bad. His velo's way down. He has a negative 3% strikeout minus walk. I've been avoiding my boy Raylo. I loved what he did last year. Thank you so much for that, Raylo. I don't owe you anything this year, and I have not been drafting him.
Yeah, fair enough. I think I'm willing to buy into the reliever converts, like, say, Clay Holmes, who actually is in this tier now. But we got to keep an eye on them in that second year after that very large innings jump. Don't want to automatically remain in on them the second season. Also, real quick on Pfaadt, we have him projected as the 5th starter right now at RotoWire, but there's some talented guys who are just outside the rotation in Arizona. Ryan Nelson and Jordan Montgomery currently look like they're out on the outside, waiting for a spot unless Pfaadt loses his, or maybe Eduardo Rodriguez does or something. If Pfaadt doesn't get off to a good April, he might not be starting in May.
I totally agree with that. Are you at all surprised that the Yankees haven't rung them up and said, can we get Jordan Montgomery back? I know he had a dreadful year last year, but the Diamondbacks are motivated to move him. I think you can get him for a song. I'm kind of surprised that they haven't called up and said, hey, we'll take him. We'll pay some of that contract. But by the same token, the Diamondbacks, you want to have depth. You don't want to just get rid of every extra guy you have, because then when injuries start to strike your team, then you're in the Yankees position. So I understand why they're not necessarily rushing to just give him away. But to your point, if Pfaadt is not cooking, there are guys that can get in there and take that spot. And with a 1-2 homer 9 and a career 1-5, I have some concerns about Brandon Pfaadt.
All right, let's move on to the SP5s and 6s, which are going from about pick 208 to just inside the top 300 here. And we'll take a look at some of the floors and the ceilings here. Let's start with the floors, though. In these SP5s and 6s, sometimes you just need some staff filler, right? Some guys who you're still drafting in the active rounds. You don't think they're very good, but you think they're good enough and they're going to be there and they're going to let you take some chances elsewhere on your roster. So who are some of the best staff filler options in this tier? Guys who are just fine and reliable.
Let me give you a youngster, because I think usually we associate floor with older guys, which makes sense, right? They've proven it. We know they're known commodities, and we feel like we can trust it. And I've got some guys for that as well. But I think Reese Olson is kind of a floor guy with some ceiling, because again, going back to Tiger's development, what they've been able to do, I think if they could find some more strikeouts, he could really rise. But even if he doesn't, let's say he stays at this 22-23% K rate, which isn't that special, but he doesn't walk too many guys, kept the ball in the yard last year, put up a 353, 118 whip in 112 innings. I think he's going to add innings this year. They're not going to do the pitching chaos thing. That's something you can only do for like a month or two at a time. You will wear out a bullpen if you do that. They need, guys to start behind Skubal, and maybe the 5th starting role could be that pitching chaos thing. You can't do that with 4 of your 5 starter roles. So I think Reese Olson's going to be relied upon for innings this year, and he's the counter to like Jackson Jobe, who's pure ceiling, right? Like you're shooting the moon with Jackson Jobe. I think you're bringing the floor up with somebody like Reese Olson. And I know this one will feel weird. I'm going to go to an old head here because of injury. Because if he gets hurt, obviously he's not giving you anything. But I do think if Max Scherzer's pitching and upright, I do think he still brings some floor. And I'm kind of intrigued by it. He's just He's just awesome, right? And he's another one of these guys that has a bit of a higher ERA. It's still below 4, but 377 and 395 the last 2 years, but good whips, 112 and 115. That's solid for where he goes. So I do think there's some floor with Scherzer. We'll see where the innings come out, but in terms of quality, I think there's some floor there. Nestor Cortez, this is such a Milwaukee guy. When they got him, they love these like mid-rotation type guys that they just get the most out of. I see Tobias Myers there on the SP6 side. And again, another young guy that, even though he's young going into his sophomore season, I think he also offers a little bit more floor than he does ceiling. So I'll say both Milwaukee guys. Waka, when he's pitching, is kind of like Eovaldi. You need to bake in missed time. Michael Waka's not going to spike 180 innings this year. I don't see it coming at all because he just doesn't do that. But for the 130 to 140 that he does pitch, you will have a known commodity that you can rely upon, and I do like. And then from there, I'm a little bit nervous about Sean Manaea with the injury. Obviously, he wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the injury. Kind of open to taking the SP79 is not a terrible game. It's just I have such a tough time taking an injured guy in the NFBC universe. So that's why I can't fully get in on it, but he's supposed to debut in April. So if you do take that shot, I do think he brings more floor than ceiling. Even though he showed a good ceiling last year, I still think you're taking him more for his floor. And then Jose Barrios. I know he had the one awful year where he had like a 5.22 ERA. He gave up 9 runs on opening day and it never got better. He just had a rotten season. But outside of that year, he is bankable for a mid to upper 3s ERA, decent whip, and Toronto's an okay team. I don't know if they're like going to be awesome this year, but you'll get a representative number of wins. So I have to throw Jose Barrios up there too.
All right, so lots of good high floor staff fillers in this range. I'll throw out 2 more names, Tanner Houck and Ranger Suarez, 2 guys who are heavy ground ball guys on good teams. I think the ceiling tends to be not that high for a guy who's, a slightly below average strikeout rate, but the floor should be good if you're keeping the ball on the ground and getting chances at wins. Moving over to the ceilings in this section, at least I think we're moving over to the ceilings. I want to get your answer to this question from Grand Admiral Posey in the chat here. Can I get a Ryan Weathers breakdown? Is Ryan Weathers somebody you'd consider a high ceiling option in this range? He's been getting a lot of buzz this spring.
He has been, and I think he deserves it. In fact, in the update that I did yesterday for my SP rankings, I've been adding more and more profiles there too, because I didn't write everybody up right away. And Weathers was one of the new profiles that is in there. And I said, the buzz is buzzing this spring with Ryan Weathers, and rightfully so. We've seen some strong springs from him before that haven't quite fully materialized into quality seasons. But in the 86 innings that we saw last year, it was a 363 ERA and 118 whip. I know I've been bagging on the Marlins a bunch during this episode, but that's really more because of their lineup. They still have a great park to pitch in. They have some pretty good pitching development over the course of their, franchise history. And obviously they've had different regimes in and out, but I don't think it's just the park. I think that they know what they're doing with pitchers. And I think Ryan Weathers is somebody that could spike a big season. I'm in on the hype because I don't think it's cost prohibitive here at SP76, pick 257. If he busts, that's not killing your season. So you can take the gamble and have a chance to spike a huge season. I am in on Ryan Weathers. Now, I will say this. I would expect the price to continue to go up. So if you aren't comfortable at 257, you're not going to be comfortable where it's at in a late March main event, because I do think he's going to creep inside the top 250, especially if he goes out and puts up another couple big spring starts for Ryan Weathers.
All right, so a lot of buzz on Ryan Weathers there. You're in, I'm in as well. Should we move on to some of the other high ceiling options in this range? Are you going to go with your Tiger, Jackson Job here? Or you got your eye on some other names?
No, I gotta include Job there. I did mention him when I was talking up Olsen. He didn't have the best start today. Gave up a couple homers to the Yankees. I'm seeing here going up against Max Fried. I don't think that that's necessarily gonna cook him. When Jason Dominguez and Paul Goldschmidt go yard on you, it's not the end of the world. That's one lefty, one righty. I will say he is in a battle for the rotation spot though, because I think Casey Mize is locked. And I think they want to get the most out of their Kenta Maeda money. It's never the best, managerial decision to choose a guy because of contract. And yet teams do it year after year after year. And from the Tigers standpoint, they're thinking, okay, if we go with Maeda early just to see what we can get, because he does have a 35% strikeout minus walk this spring, although he also has a 2.8 homer 9. So it's not like it's been all roses and sunshine there. But if they just try to get like 6 weeks out of him and then they bring Job up for the summer and stretch run, I can see how that makes sense in the aggregate. That said, I've still been drafting Job, taking my shot because he is the first man up when anything happens too. And we know that injuries happen all the time to pitchers. And what if Maeda keeps giving up 2.8 homers per nine? He'll be out in a flash. So I do still like Jackson Job. I don't take him, and I don't really advocate taking him at 221, but Nick Lodolo does have upside. If he can figure out the home runs, which is very difficult in that park, it's just like Hunter Green, the talent is there, though, and it is rich. So I root for Nick Lodolo. I would do anything to get him on a different team, though. I just have too much fear about taking Cincinnati pitchers. I do love Grant Holmes. Big on the Grant Holmes hype train, been taking him left and right. I'll still pay the 258. It's probably going to keep going up. He's another guy like Weathers who could jump into the top 250. I don't think that'll push me off, though, because I think he's still going to hold a spot as long as he pitches well. Obviously, if he gets his face caved in the first month, then he'll be the guy out for Strider. But my guess is that if he's pitching well, if he and Ian Anderson are pitching similarly, I think Holmes is still going to be the guy. That stays in, and Anderson's going to have to go out for Strider. And that's only if they're pitching similarly, which I'm not sure that Ian Anderson will be pitching as well as Grant Holmes. Dustin May definitely has huge upside. He is going to start in the rotation. We don't know how they're going to manage him. You're going to have to play the games with the Dodgers, but I do like Dustin May. And then one more is Max Meyer, another Marlin, who's got a ton of upside. He was a big-time draft pick who's dealt with injuries, looks back, ready to go. And again, give me some guys in that ballpark, whereas I don't want anybody in Cincy's ballpark. I'll take damn near anybody in the Marlins ballpark, except for you, Cal Quantrill. You go sit in the corner. I don't want to draft you.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, so we move on to the guys going outside the top 300. So these are maybe your SP7s or even some guys you're taking in the reserve rounds. I pulled out every guy who was selected in all 4 main event drafts. There may be some names who you might want to take a shot on who I don't have on the list here. If you can think of them, feel free. But I don't think we need to talk about the downsides of any of these guys, given how low they go in draft. Let's just talk about upside. If you're chasing upside very late, who here has it?
I'm not dodging the homer allegations today, folks, because Casey Mize is who I'm going to lead off with, but he's really looking strong in spring, and it's not just the surface numbers with the 33% K rate, and I know it's a 12% walk rate as well, but I have been watching his spring starts, and I don't think he has no idea where it's going. He is working with some new refined stuff. Upper 90s fastballs, top of the zone for punchies. The splitter looks back toward what it was with Auburn when he went number 1 overall. It's a do or die type of season. I forget who you were mentioning that about earlier, where you said it's our last. Oh, Brett Beatty, our last chance saloon. Yep. This is it. If Casey Mize flops on us again, I'm out. But I'm willing to take another shot this year, and he's priced to buy. He could keep going up, but even if he goes up another 50 picks to 250, I'll still pay that. I mentioned my love affair with Angels starters. Soriano and Reed Detmers are chief among them, and I'm going to go back to the well because, Soriano was good last year, so he doesn't even deserve kind of the derision that I'm giving Reed Detmers. But despite what Reed Detmers has done at times to people's ERAs, I still believe that there's a lot of talent in his arm, and I have a hard time not still taking the chance past pick 300 on Reed Detmers. So I'm definitely in there. Michael Soroka, very in on this. He's been having an electric spring. That's why he's moving up in the rankings, and I think he should. SP97, though, is still much, much cheaper than it should be. I think upwards of SP75, 80, I would still pay that at this point with Soroka. Health is the issue right now, not talent. And yes, you are risking the health. I'll take that risk. And then in the second column, I'm a big Hayden Wesneski guy, and he flopped for me in 23 after the big 2022, but I like him going to the Astros. They are a team that gets the most out of their pitchers. Hopefully they got some plans for him and what to do with that sweeper to maximize. He's got a 41% K rate in spring. It's 6 innings, y'all. Let's not make too much of it, but I do like to see that he's finding some success. I think Houston will get the most out of Hayden Wesneski. Very excited about him. Continuing on there are not a ton of guys in the second column that I'm super. Oh, Zebby Matthews. I'd be remiss not to mention Zebby Matthews. I was very big on him. And in fact, I was writing an update yesterday about his hip strain. And little did I realize, Eric, that he was pitching at the time that I was writing it up. I thought he was still out. So then later that night, I saw that he had pitched. And I was like, wait a minute, I got to kind of undo this, cautious update that I did and get right back in on him. I love Zebby Matthews. I know he's on the outside looking in with Simeon Woods, Richardson, and Chris Paddock there. I'll take the shot. I know I've mentioned a few times that I don't love stashes in the main event as far as injury or minor leaguers, but I do think he's the first man up. And I think there's still enough time for him to push out SWR or Chris Paddock. Zebby Matthews is a stud, and I'm in at SP121 all day long.
All right. So I think we've gotten to the end here. We've listed about a third of the pitchers that we like, something like that. Hopefully we've given listeners
a lot of names.
Plenty of potential targets. Try to give you some high floor and some high ceiling options all around there. Is there anyone that you want to mention that we missed? We've gone through the whole list, I think, and given you the chance to talk up pretty much everyone, but here's your final chance.
I'll still have other guys that I can talk about. I'm kind of keyed up about Andrew Heaney in Pittsburgh. He's having a rough spring, but just to show that I'm not only going off guys that have a good spring, it's 4 innings. I don't really care. He's a perfectly cromulent pitcher, and he opens with the Marlins. So maybe you just get the first start and you move on. It's pick 400. Like, who cares? It is your last pick. So I have no problem with that with Andrew Heaney. I thought that was a good signing by them. Talking about teams that sign a player that kind of fixes their biggest issue. He's always been a home run machine, and PNC Park does mitigate homers. So like I said, even if we just do the one and done with the Miami start, I'll take the shot there. Did you just mean on this list or on the list at large?
Anyone we forgot about that you really wanted to make sure we didn't skip over in this episode? Here's your final chance.
I like Spencer Arrighetti in Houston. Goes back to how I feel about Houston developing pitchers. He showed a lot of strikeout capability. I know he finished kind of on a sour note, but I still think there's a ton of upside with Spencer Arrighetti. So I definitely like him. And honestly, I think that, Chris Bubich. I'm in on the Chris Bubich hype. He's surging up right now, but he's having a good spring. He was amazing out of the bullpen at the end of last year. And I think people glossed over that. I don't think they necessarily noticed it. And I understand, he's just kind of hidden there in the second half, 30 innings, but he showed the same sort of skills that we saw in that little 3-start sample in 2023 before the TJ. And he just continues to show those skills in 23, 24, and now early in spring training. And you can add up all 3 of those samples, and we're still only talking about like 50 innings. So it's not a whole lot to go off of. But I think Chris Bubich has made tangible changes. I trust KC because they have a decent ballpark to pitch in. It does actually spike offense, but it doesn't spike homers. And so I'll take my shot on that he can keep the hits in check, which is what Kauffman boosts up, especially because he doesn't walk guys. He gets strikeouts, and he should have good win chance because that's a decent enough lineup. I think they'll be, fringe contenders again this year in KC. I don't think they're necessarily going to storm the division and win like 90 plus games, but I think they're going to be in the 80s. So you'll have opportunities to garner wins with your KC pitcher. So I do like Chris Bubich on the bounce back this year after some things he's shown in some admittedly tiny samples.
Yeah, I'm intrigued as well. That's going to do it for today's episode. Paul, if people want to hear more of your starting pitcher takes, you are in the middle of your starting pitcher preview on the Sleeper and the Bus. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes. In fact, I'm going to eat lunch after this and then go record another episode with Joe Arrico. With Justin being in New York, it'll be Joe and I going through more pitchers, and that's on the Sleeper and the Bust over at FanGraphs, fantasy.fangraphs.com. It's the Rotograph side, but you can't do rotographs.com. So just go to fangraphs.com. You'll find it there. We've been churning out the episodes. This is the best time of year, Eric, especially if you're a college basketball fan as well, because obviously tournament time is coming up. The weather's turning. Baseball's coming. This is just such an electric time of the year. Always has me excited. So I cannot wait to really keep diving into pitchers and then start to do my big drafts. I've done a lot of drafts already, but the main event, I let it live up to that name. It is my main event. It is my biggest, most important draft. At that price point, how can it not be? And I'm looking forward to that the Saturday after this one.
Nice. Yeah, we'll love to see who you end up from this list, who ends up on your team. Maybe none of these guys, somehow a complete disaster. I don't think so. I think we mentioned, again, 30 to 40 names. I think you should be able to find a few from there and end up okay. So. That's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you very much, Paul. Go check out the Sleeper and the Bust. Yeah, and go check out all Paul's work over at FanGraphs. That'll do it for today's show. We'll be back tomorrow on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Fantrax.